Good morning. A little cooler today than it was last Sunday. Our windows open. Hopefully the building will warm up here shortly. But a couple of announcements as we get started. First off, next Sunday, Lord willing, we would like to have a business meeting. Hopefully you all saw on Facebook, I posted kind of the agenda and several of the items that we need to discuss. I guess to make a clarification, which I think I have done. I think it made sense to my wife, but I just want to make sure that everybody's on the right page. As far as the Constitution goes, I attached it was like 22 pages, and everything in red was a different wording that CLA recommends, Christian Law Association, and they say that the wording changes are because of lawsuits and things that they have observed in churches. So they seem to be highly recommended. What we need to discuss next week is if we want to move forward with doing that. It's not to change it, it's to move forward in changing it, if that makes sense. Because there's a whole process of getting it announced and being able to read it ahead of time and all of that needs to be accomplished. And truthfully, all the red, although we could do a blanket and just say whatever they have is good, we'll call it good from this point forward. That may happen, but there may also be that we like this section, but we don't need this section. We'd like to change this to that, or whatever it might be. And I really think, I'm not trying to just pass the buck here, but I really think that constitutional changes should be membership driven, not pastor driven. Kind of hesitate, except in the cases where, like Reverend Bob says, this has to be in your Constitution. So we've definitely pushed for those specific changes. But otherwise, I don't think it's right for a pastor to come in and just change something, and then he leaves, and then the church is left with sometimes the mess the pastor left them. And so I think it really should be church membership driven. But look that over. I know it's a lot of pages, and you can read all the black print, but truthfully, that's what it is now. I guess the more important one would be the all that's in the red font, and to decide if that's something that we'd like to do or not. It was interesting as I was reading through, especially the doctrinal section of our Constitution, how literally it was word for word. And you'll notice that there's a few sections that they've added, but a lot of times the only changes were that they'd have 7 Bible references instead of 5 like we had. So I just found that very interesting. Clearly there's a universal Baptist Constitution for the doctrinal statement somewhere that a lot of churches use. And so anyway, think along those lines. But next week, this is not to change it. It's to start the process of changing it. And we'll go from there. I don't think there was anything else specifically from what I posted last night. If you're not on Facebook, or if you like it in print, let us know. We can certainly print it off or email it to you in a different format if that would be better, more convenient as well.
I did have a question. What was in the yellow? Was that just
Oh, what did I put in yellow?
about
Yellow.
when the church services were?
Yes, I think yellow was a something that we should consider, but not necessarily because of CLA. If we do change the Constitution, we really need to again kind of go through and make sure that everything that it says we are doing, or if it's something that has leeway, we need to change it so that it says what we are doing. Because in the instances of marriage and homosexuality and all the other things that are there doctrinally, if we're not doing these things, it can be used in court to prove, well, if you're not going to do this part, then why are you worried about that part? And so I think the yellow had some, I don't remember what it was, but it had something.
Mostly church, like Sunday schools, morning,
Yes.
night, Wednesday night.
Yes. And we haven't had a Sunday night service in quite some time. I think it was one of the reasons why I did that. And so we may want to consider just rephrasing that so that.
You don't want something in the Constitution we're not.
Correct, yes. Now, if it's something that is biblical, and it's there because it's a biblical statement, and we're not doing it, then we just need to start doing it. But if it's something that is, the service times are not something that is a biblical mandate, and so if we're not doing what the Constitution says, we should change it to what we are doing, and not COVID specific, but in general, so that we can abide by it, so that the rest of it has some a leg to stand on. So anyway, a lot to consider, a lot to discuss. Next week, as far as just the Constitution part goes, it would just simply be a vote of, yeah, I think we should move forward and consider some possibilities. And yeah or nay on that, and we begin the journey on that regard as well. Then the 16th, about a month away from now, Brent Savinsky and I assume family will be here. He'll just be here for the day. He'll come in Saturday and leave Monday. He'll just be here for the day, but we're going to have 2 services, and I hope that all of you can come back for this. But he'll be here for our normal Sunday morning service and preach. And I have heard and I've I've listened online that his sermons are getting a little bit longer. Not to the extent of mine yet, but he goes farther than 12 minutes nowadays. But we'll probably still be out pretty early. And then the girls are going to have a graduation kind of service of sorts at 3 o'clock. And so we're hoping that you can come back for that. If we have to bribe you to feed you, in the meantime, we could maybe work out some details in that regard as well. But we'd encourage you to come back, and that'll be more of a graduation. But I don't think they're going to be walking the platform or getting a diploma or anything along those lines, but unless they want to. What did I have to do for my graduate? I think I had to give a little speech, right? Isn't that how high school worked? I think 8th grade, I think the parents had to give a speech, and then high school, I had to give one, it seems like. That's how that went. We could. That's right, we have a valedictorian, and what's the runner-up? They had to say something. Well, that's right. Was that?
Question you asked, but I think you did have the boys give one, so to be fair to the boys.
Oh, wow. just claim the women should be silent. I don't mean about my mom, but I mean my daughters. You get in trouble on all sides on this one. Anyway, back to Brent Savinsky. He will be here shortly. If you have not heard him, it's always a joy to have him. Sometimes it's a joy as we are walking softly after he's stomped on our toes at times. But looking forward to having Brent Savinsky here May 16th. Other than that, I don't think we have anything immediate in that regard. Having said that, then, some prayer requests. We certainly want to pray for Lori and then their 2 remaining kids, Brian and Kayla, and extended families and grandkids and all of that with the recent passing last Sunday, passing of Denny. Rather unexpected, certainly. Sounds from what I'm picking up, it was an Easter family gathering, and fellow of the floor had a seizure and then just continued having them and passed away 1:30 in the morning on Monday morning. And so certainly be in prayer for Lori. It wasn't that. In fact, it was the exact day of the boys' graduation that their son Jason was killed in a car accident. And so to lose a son not that many years ago, her brother just a month ago, and now her husband, she's been hit pretty hard lately. So certainly be in prayer for Lori, and then their 2 kids, Brian and Kayla. But any other prayer requests or updates?
Tina's doing well.
Very good.
Possibly come back to work tomorrow, I'm not sure, but she's doing very well. The bakers, it sounded like they're home now, so they're away from it, and she finally was able to tell us. Sometimes they're not able to call it, but they
Yes.
So it sounded like the typhoid was intentional.
Yeah.
They say they got their water source. So
Really?
looked on their wall and got their water source, so there was a lot of things happening there. But they're home. They're tiny, so they're looking to get that help and get the medical help and that's.
Wow. Wow. Anybody else?
This is the week that Ava has all those tests.
Oh, yes.
I mean, it's gonna be 3 intensive days of bone marrow and echocardiogram and x-rays and blood tests and her brother later in the week, we'll be getting ready for his loan transfer.
Yes.
That schedule on the prayer list that you
Yes,
shared
I
with me,
thought
so
it was
if
really
people
helpful.
wanted to look through it, you can kind of break through the days.
Yes.
Lucas leaves for Tennessee tomorrow, just for safety. Very early tomorrow. Just for safety and, God would use him, God would use
Yes.
the trip to work in the kids' lives.
Very good.
These trips, whether they're somewhat local like that or overseas, can have a big impact.
Correct.
Whether you're young or not so young.
Yes. Was it last weekend? A lot of Tennessee got drowned in
Oh,
floodwaters.
what's the last
I
weekend?
think it was last week, Easter weekend. Anybody else? If not, let's go to the Lord of Prayer. Lord, we thank you again for your goodness. We thank you again for that empty tomb. We thank you for the reality that nothing ever takes you by surprise, but we certainly do pray that you be with the Jackson family. Be with Lori. Certainly there's got to be a tremendous heaviness on her heart, even here this morning. I pray that you would give a peace that passes all understanding, despite the sorrow. I pray that you give her a hope for tomorrow, even her own heart and eternity. And I pray that you be with that family, as certainly they were not expecting the week that they had. And I just pray that you would draw them to you, not away from you. And I just pray that you would do what only you can do in that situation. And certainly there are times that we don't understand, but we know that you are in control. And I just pray that they'd be able to see that and sense your very presence there. Thank you that Tina is improving and perhaps returning to work here very shortly. That you just continue to give a full return of health and just the road, whatever that might be ahead as well. We pray for the Bakers as well, certainly back home. But I just ask that you'd be with the situation there in Haiti, and certainly the mission need there as well. And so I'm certain there's some torn hearts as they know that they are much safer here, especially as they're recovering, but as well the great need for those who are still there. And I just pray that you'd give them direction and just an understanding of the timeline and what it is that you have for them. And but I do pray as well that you'd just return them to full health and full strength as well. And I just ask again that you do what only you can do, so that only you are glorified in it. So we pray for Ava as she begins the first of many weeks here this week of some tests and procedures and just a long road ahead. I just ask that you would give her that health that is necessary, the strength that certainly she will need. But I pray that she'll be able to continue to see you as well through it all. And we thank you for her testimony to this point. Pray you be with her brother as well as he begins in some extent, very similar steps. And I just ask that here this week, as it all begins, that you would just encourage her in the midst of the storm, in the midst of undoubtedly an attack on her physical and perhaps even emotional well-being. But I just pray that you would certainly do, again, what only you can do for your honor and your glory. And for Lucas and the rest of the high schoolers that are going to be heading to Tennessee do some labor, I just pray that you keep them safe as they travel tomorrow, and as well as they serve. I just ask that you would certainly direct their steps and their hearts here this week. And just we thank you for opportunities that you present our way. And for the other requests, certainly there on our screen, in our apps, in our hearts, in our lives, we certainly do acknowledge that you're always there. You are always orchestrating those events. You're always orchestrating, even in the midst of storms, in the midst of tragedy, to accomplish your perfect will. And I just pray that we'd be able to learn to trust, that we'd be able to learn to follow. And as we'll look at here this morning, that we learn how to submit or yield ourselves to you. And we thank you for what you will do. In Jesus' name, amen. At this time, we have special music.
Oh
good. This morning we want to go back to Numbers chapter 22 as we continue on their journey, the children of Israel, but as well as we consider our thinking here in the year 2021. There has been much already this year that presents a lot of opportunities for us to either think on these things or on all the other things that we ought not to be thinking about and become distracted by that. And I think there's a great reminder of what are we thinking and the challenge in that regard. This morning, as we look at this, we're going to read most of this chapter here, chapter 22. We want to be considering or thinking on the topic of submission. And because we're going to read so many verses throughout the message, I won't read the entirety of it here at the beginning, but certainly probably a familiar incident with a talking mule. And all the details and all the unknowns actually that are involved in this passage. We'll kind of sort our way through that, but we're looking at the specifics of how do I need to submit, how do I need to yield to our Lord as well. But before we dive into that, let's begin with the word of prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for your word. Thank you for the opportunity now as we can go to that word. I pray again that you allow me to decrease, that you alone would increase. I just ask that you would make that message, this message from this chapter, relevant and applicable to our lives, that we'd be able to understand that application for us today, and that we'd be able to live it beginning today as well. And we thank you for what you will do. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm reminded, I'm certain I've said this before, but I'm reminded, I think it was when we had a kids program. We first got here to Tulana 19 years ago now. We started a kids program, and we kind of rotated through as far as the adults giving a devotional, and one of Mr. Cole's first devotionals that he gave, and obviously this was, 18 years ago, but when you think about that, he still would have been, 81, 82 years old. He came in with, and I kid you not, a yield sign from off of a street sign, and I remember thinking to myself, I hope he just didn't unbolt that from a post somewhere. And you never really knew with Mr. Cole if this was all kosher, not saying that he bent the rules or broke the law or anything, but did he just see a sign by his house and think, I could take that one, and got out his ratchet set, and here he came. I'm certain he did it the right way, but anyway, he stood up there, and it's amazing how big those signs look when they're in somebody's hands and not mounted on a post, and he spoke to the kids about yielding, and I don't remember all the details, but I remember being quite impressed, thinking, very well done, Mr. Cole. He really captivated those kids' minds. Here's a 81, 82-year-old with a bunch of kids. It was pretty much the 4 pews on this side. All the kids on the edge of their seat just waiting for his next words as he taught them. But there's a truth that is said not just for kids but for us adults as well on what it means to yield. I think a lot of times when we think about yielding, when we think about submitting, we often consider marriage. This certainly is not a chapter on marriage. But in that regard, in Ephesians chapter 5, as it mentions wives submitting, the last phrase says, as unto the Lord. It's amazing to me how often we can disregard our submission to one another. In fact, the very verse before we begin in the topic of marriage, it says that we are to submit to one another. And it's amazing how we can disconnect our submission, our yielding, would that be horizontally, but still expect that our submission vertically is still correct. And how they technically go hand in hand. And as I submit to my Lord, I'm able to, as it says, submit to one another. And we're able to have that unity in that regard, but it requires the vertical and able to do the horizontal. But learning to submit. I'm not I told my wife, she came downstairs as I was preparing this, and I think she brought me a root beer, a glass of root beer as I was studying, and I told her, I said, I think I'm going to do something this Sunday that I've never probably done in my entire however many years of preaching. I'm going to quote a Gaither song, and that's exactly the response that I got. She just shook her head, and she wondered if she needed to send out a warning to everybody before you got here this morning. I think Gaithers have some very catchy tunes, very easy to sing tunes. Their theology is not always easy biblically. And so in that regard, there's often and as many times is the case in a lot of Southern gospel music, but not just to pick on the Gaithers. But anyway, they have a song. In fact, I think it was more of a poem that they converted into a song, and there's some tweaks that they made to it. And I might have to have Joe Miller come up here and sing the chorus because, number one, I'm not going to. And number two, you really can't read the chorus. It has to be sung. But bear with me as I read. What was that?
I don't have the hair for it.
You don't have the hair for it. You got to have the beard down to here. Oh, but the song begins, and it's probably some of you, as soon as I start, you'll know what song this is. But it starts kind of a narration. And it's kind of what did that become, like a baritone voice, but then the chorus is definitely a tenor. And so I don't know if it's the same person doing this or how, I don't know all the details. But anyway, in the midst of World War II, with tensions running high off the eastern seaboard one dark and foggy night, and it's even hard for me to read those without doing the long words there, a captain sighted out ahead just off the starboard side a beacon of another ship. The two would soon collide. "Adjust your course 10 degrees to the north," he radioed ahead. And much to his amazement, the ship replied instead, "Adjust your course 10 degrees to the south." The captain felt a chill. His eyes grew cold and narrow, and the two grew closer still. "I'm the captain of this vessel, and this is a command. Adjust your course 10 degrees to the north, or receive a reprimand." Again, the voice replying was calm and smooth as glass. "Adjust your course 10 degrees to the south. I'm a seaman second class." "I'm a U.S. naval destroyer," snapped the captain with a shout. "Now adjust the course 10 degrees, no discussion over and out." They drew unnervingly closer, his eyes fixed on the light. This time the voice ripped through the air like lightning tears the night. And if you know the song, you know how the chorus goes. In a tenor voice, unfortunately, I cannot do that tenor voice, so it is what it is. But it's the reply is, "I am the lighthouse. I'm the lighthouse. The path you have chosen is perilous. Destruction lies ahead if you delay. But if you'll trust me, I will lead you through safely. Adjust your course and you'll be on your way. I'm the lighthouse." And probably, I know that there's been more than the Gaither. I don't even know if it was the Gaither that started it. When you Google, there's a ton of people that have sung that song, recorded that song. So it may not even be truthfully credited to the Gaithers at all. But it's certainly the Gaithers version is the one I'm very familiar with. And what a reminder how often we argue and we pull rank and we like to fight back. And all the while, truthfully, it's our God who we're arguing with. It's our God who we're rebelling against. Numbers chapter 22 doesn't involve a captain, doesn't involve a seaman second class. It doesn't involve a U.S. naval destroyer, and it certainly doesn't involve necessarily a lighthouse. But there's a nation of the children of Israel. There are two kingdoms in great fear. There is a seer that fails to see, and a donkey that fails to keep quiet. All here in Numbers chapter 22, and I think it also shows us a tremendous importance of what it means to truly submit. As you look at it from several different perspectives. What keeps us from submitting? What keeps us from yielding? What keeps us from following after God, come what may? What keeps us from being that one who's going to argue with a lighthouse? What keeps us from heading in the direction that we ought to go? Well, we're going to look, not surprisingly, 3 quick points here this morning. Quick points. I had to remind my daughters again, for one of their classes they have to read, was it Philippians 6 times, I believe? And come up with questions and little, homework in regards to reading it 6 times. And Philippians is one of those great books, and you probably all know this because I've said this many times, but at the halfway point, Philippians chapter 3, verse 1, Paul says, "Finally, my brethren," and he still has another half of the letter to write. And I'm thankful for that because he pretty much laid the groundwork for all pastors thereafter. Finally, my brethren, and I still have half of the message to go. So as we, not even quite to the finally, my brethren part, the first point, we are sometimes too stubborn to acknowledge the main characters. Let me read the first several verses here. The children of Israel set forward and pitched in the plains of Moab on this side Jordan by Jericho. And Balak the son of Zippor saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. And Moab was sore afraid of the people, because they were many. And Moab was distressed because of the children of Israel. And Moab said unto the elders of Midian, Now shall this company lick up all that are around about us, as the ox licketh up the grass of the field. And Balak the son of Zippor was king of the Moabites at that time. And he sent messengers therefore unto Balaam the son of Beor to Bethor, which is by the river of the land of the children of this people, to call him, saying, Behold, there is a people come out from Egypt. Behold, they cover the face of the earth, and they abide over against me. Come now, therefore, I pray thee, curse me this people, for they are too mighty for me. Peradventure I shall prevail that we might smite them, and that I might drive them out of the land, for I want that whom thou blessest is blessed, and he whom thou cursest is cursed. Now I could ask a simple question, who, or we could even almost use the word what, but more specifically, who are the main characters in this passage? Not just these 6 verses, but what is to come. Certainly verse 1 mentions the children of Israel, where they are pitched. Verse 2 mentions Balak, the son of Zippor, and certainly as a king. We have also in verse 2 the people group previously called the Amorites, but they have literally been already wiped out by the children of Israel. Verse 3, we have Moab, the entire nation of Moab, that was sore afraid. Verse 4, we have Moab and Midian, and again, Balak, the son of Zippor, the king of the Moabites. And then in verse 5, we have Balaam introduced. And a little later, we know that we're going to have several messengers coming from the king, and then as well, we know there's going to be a donkey involved and the angel of the Lord. Who are the main characters of this passage? I think that there are some points that we need to consider as far as the main characters go, even for our own life, because I believe, at least speaking for myself, there are times that we neglect to see who the main characters are, and in our own stubbornness and our own lack of yielding, we forget what's at play here, or more specifically, who's at play here. It says here in verse 3, if we can kind of begin to pick away who isn't the main characters, when we consider Balak, the king. What do we know about him at this point? We know that he was the king of the Moabites. In verse 3, it says that Moab was sore afraid, and they were distressed. Now, ultimately, it is believed that this is more of a passing on the king's response to the entirety of the nation. Certainly, it seems that as the one went, the rest went. As the leadership goes, so do the rest of the people. And so although that it says Moab, verse 3, was sore afraid of this nation of Israel, and they were distressed because of this nation of Israel, I think it's safe to assume that this also undoubtedly even began with the response of Balak. There's interesting words there in verse 3, though, as far as it says, sore afraid, and then as well, distressed. And I think there's great significance in them. Sore afraid has that concept, I think I have it up there, yes, of great power with uncertain response. We probably all face those times of being sore afraid. You know that there's something of great power and we're not sure what's going to happen. And so we have that fear. I recall after that storm in, 2003? Straight line winds came through and kind of made a mess of town. And I was on the ambulance, obviously at that time, and the fire department. And I remember day after day, it was probably for at least a good week or two, all you heard going from sun up to sundown was chainsaws. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't like this. Now, I don't mind using a chainsaw, and I've used it enough, we'll say it that way. But the thought of all these chainsaws and not knowing the abilities of these people and thinking what harm could be done because of these chainsaws, of someone who perhaps has never used a chainsaw, borrowed it from a friend so they could cut the tree down in their yard. I just envisioned ambulance call after ambulance call of severed limbs and death and destruction, we could say. Every time I'd walk outside and hear the whole town, it was an unbelievable sound. The whole town just sounded like one gigantic chainsaw. For days after that storm. But I was thinking as well, even more specifically, when I was in college, worked working security both on campus and off campus, and then for my year of internship in the summer at Calvary Baptist in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. I also worked security then all summer, and I worked for a security company out of Madison that most of the time I would work in a factory, which was about as boring could be. Working in a third shift in a factory when you're the only person there, but having to make the rounds every hour and start the equipment so that it's all warmed up and ready to go by the time the first shift got there. And it just made for some long nights. But they also at times would move me around to different places, which often brought some excitement. And it always seemed, and I don't understand why, but keep in mind I'm there to do a church internship, that Saturday nights I'd be scheduled to work at either a bar or a summer festival event downtown Madison, usually involved with the beer tents and all that's going on there. Here I'm barely 21 years old myself, if even 21 years old. I probably wasn't even 21 years old, and I am the one kind of having to, for the outside event, check IDs and make sure that they were over 21, and then for the bar event, to ask people to leave when it certainly was time for them to leave. And I think I believe this to be the case as clearly I'm looking like a pastoral intern. I've got the haircut, I've got the smile, obviously I'm not smoking, there's no tattoos on my body, I've never held alcohol in my hands, and here I am at the door of a bar, and I know that there were some wonderful bartenders who would call me over to say that guy over there needs to be asked to leave. And they'd say that with a twinkle in their eye. And I know why they were doing that. Because it was always the biggest guy, the leather vest, tattoos down both arms, and the arms were bigger than my stomach at that time. Obviously, I was much smaller at that time, but this dude's arms were just massive. And go tell that guy he's had enough to drink, he needs to leave. And he says that with a smile in his eye, if you could say it that way. And if I could tell you what sore afraid is, by that definition, that's it. I knew that this guy had the power to smash me like a bug. I knew that this guy could just do one of these, and I'd be splattered against the wall if he wanted to. I also knew that he had the power and the ability to just pick me up, turn me upside down, and shove me right up into the garbage can. My feet, just kicking in the air. But here I am, tapping him on the shoulder. Sir, it's time for you to leave. And not only that, but if I have to ask somebody to leave, I have to follow them outside to make sure that they don't drive away. Obviously, I can't kick them out of the bar and then watch them get in their car and drive home. And so how do you tell a 400-pound biker dude that he has to leave his bike in the parking lot and wait for the taxi that I've just called for him? How does one do that with a monster of a guy? Sore afraid is how you do that. You do that sore afraid. You know that there is might. You know that there is power. You know that there, in this case, is drunkenness, which also can come with very rash emotions and rapid anger. And here I am, a young preacher boy college student, saying, please just sit right there while we wait for your taxi. So, how about the Cubs? No, don't ask that in Madison. How about the Brewers? And I know nothing about, what do you talk to this guy? So, I like your leather jacket. No, I don't. What's your bike? And he'll tell me. That means nothing to me. What do you do for 15 minutes while you're making sure this guy doesn't move, but he has all the ability to move or do whatever he wants, because I literally do not have the ability to stop him. That's exactly what is being described in verse 3. They saw the children of Israel, and they were sore afraid, to the extent of they knew the might, they knew the power, they knew the ability that this nation had, and they knew that they could be the ones flipped upside down and shoved into a garbage can. They knew that they had no means to stop them. And so as we consider that first word there in verse 3, they're sore afraid. We move on to that second word here in verse 3, where it says that they were distressed. And as I have there on the screen, it means a great desire to remove or separate from. Because of their being sore afraid, they had a great desire to be separated from. Back to my illustration, it was always a wonderful sight to see a taxi pulling out of the parking lot. I could breathe again. I could almost, not that this ever happened, but you could go around the corner and vomit if you had to. Made it through that one. And I know that I'm going to go back in there and they're just going to send me out with another guy. I know that's what's going to happen here. The truth is that's what the distress means. They were so afraid because of the power that was evident and their inability to do anything about it. And as well, they had a great desire to be separated, to not have that instance in their life anymore. And I would say that probably all of us have faced circumstances where we truly have been sore afraid. But I don't believe that Balak is one of the key players in this passage. What do we know about Balaam? He's introduced very briefly. What is interesting as you look at the entirety of the chapter, we really don't know much about Balaam. In fact, scholars much smarter than I probably will ever be have debated on the righteousness of this man. We know that his ultimate demise would come because of his own wickedness, of his own sinfulness. But was he a follower of God? The word that is used in regards to he prayed to God is what is interesting, to give you a kind of a background, when it mentions, specifically when he mentions that he needs to pray to God, this is later on, the word that is used could be used as a general word of really any God. The narrator, if we could say it that way, of Numbers, we know it would be Moses, but as Moses narrates this, the word that he uses is Elohim, which can only refer to the God. And so as we even debate, so what does that mean? Moses is calling it, referencing the God, the one true God, but the very word that is used is not the same word that Moses is using. When Balaam uses the word, he uses a different word. And so what is the connotation there? The truth is there's great debate. And honestly, the truth is whatever side that we stand on that, it's easy to prove whatever side it is. If you want to say, well, Balaam, he really wasn't a man of God at all, there's enough evidence to support that. Or you can say, oh, Balaam was truly a man of God. And as the king says, whoever you curse is cursed, and whoever you bless is blessed. And that could only have been from the hand of God. And when he says that he prays or consults God, he means the God. And when we consider all that he is, so certainly he had to have been a righteous man in a land that really, truthfully, didn't know what righteousness was. And you can find enough support for that. It's great to kind of be kind of step back with your bowl of popcorn and just eat while you watch this debate follow out. You know, who's right in this instance? Who is Balaam? I find it fascinating that as he is introduced in this chapter, we're not really given much of a description of him. We're told where he lives. We're told who he's the son of. But we're not really told much of anything else. So back to our first question, who are the key players here? I don't believe that Balaam was. I don't believe that Balak was. I don't believe that the donkey was. How often we find ourselves in the most hard-hearted and stubborn moments of our life simply because we've forgotten who the key players are. Who is the key character in this passage? Why was there such fear? Why was there a need to bring in a seer to curse these people? Why was it the people were not only sore afraid but distressed? It was because of the nation of Israel. But why the nation of Israel? Because who their God was. You know, I think there's a lot of times that we lose sight of the key player in the circumstances of our life. This is all about God. We could say it this way. This is God versus the world. This is God versus the Moabites. This is God versus the Amorites. This is God versus the Midianites. This is God moving with the people of Israel and the terror that comes because of our God. But when I am stubborn, when I am not willing to submit to myself, who becomes the key player? Well, me. I'm a key player in this circumstance. This is what I am facing. This is what I'm going through. I'm a key player here. Who's another key player? It's whoever's bringing me resistance. It's whoever's causing a hiccup in my life. It's whatever that speed bump is in my day-to-day routine. Those become the key players when we are resisting who God is or resisting what God is doing. And we begin to define key players by it's me and it's that or them or him or her, whatever it might be. And those become the key players. In marriage, again, not that this has anything to do with marriage at all, but the same topic in marriage, is that not often the case? The key players in marriage problems become man versus woman. Who's the key player? Who's the key character? It's our God. And until we get reminded of that, until we have that thinking straight in our hearts and our minds, the key character is my God. Well, suddenly then it's no longer it's about me and them, but it's about my God and what he is doing. And suddenly I want to be submissive to what God is doing because obviously I know, as these people are, you'd be sore afraid to stand against God. You'd be sore afraid to say, but this is what I You'd be so... I'll get the PA system going here. You'd be sore afraid to be able to shake our little puny fists to talk about me going up to a 400-pound biker dude and tapping, it's time for you to come out here. We need to go. Can you imagine doing that to our God? You know, when we lose sight of what it means to submit, when we become too stubborn to yield our hearts to our God, it's because we have forgotten the key character in our life. This is not about Balak and Balaam. This is not even about a donkey that talks. This is about a God who was doing mighty things for an entire nation of Israel that caused great fear in all those that surrounded them. Not because of who they were, but because of who their God was. Be reminded of that. Because if we forget our God as the key character, it will be easier for us to be too stubborn to submit. And so, do we remember, as we face life, who those key characters are? But continuing on, read verse 7. Sometimes, boy, without raising your hand, I'll raise my hand, but have you ever been too stubborn to hear the word no? I know as children, did we not all do that? No, again, don't raise your hand, but how many times did you ask your mom something? She said no, so you went to your dad, or vice versa. You asked your dad first and you went to your mom. One would say yes, one would say no. And we didn't like the answer for one, so we sought out another. Or how many times did maybe we had unity there and it was a no and a no, but yet we ask it again in a different way, hoping for a different response. And you know, we've all had times where we fail to submit until we can hear what we want to hear. And I love this. We have to be cautious because a lot of this was what was the norm. So don't get too judgmental here, but let me read these verses. Verse 7. The elders of Moab and the elders of the Midian departed with the rewards of divination in their hand. And they came unto Balaam and spake unto him the words of Balak. And he said unto them, Lodge here this night, and I will bring you word again, as the Lord shall speak unto me. And the princes of Moab abode with Balaam. And God came unto Balaam. So going back to what I was talking about, the verbs, verse 8 there, not the verbs, the nouns here. When it says, and the Lord shall speak unto me, that word there, that Balak is, or Balaam is actually speaking to the messengers of Balak, is a word that has an idea that could, in essence, refer to any god, ultimately. But when we move into verse 9, where it's obviously Moses' narration, and God came unto Balaam, that truly is the one true God. And so you can see how these words even are different, and you have to ask why. Why were they different? Why did Moses, when he wrote this, choose one word for one and another word for another? We don't know, but it's an interesting point. Verse 9, and God came unto Balaam and said, What men are these with thee? And Balaam said unto God, Balak, the son of Zippor, the king of Moab, hath sent me unto me, saying, Behold, there is a people come out of Egypt, which covereth the face of the earth. Come now, curse me them, peradventure I shall be able to overcome them and drive them out. And God said unto Balaam, Thou shalt not go with them, thou shalt not curse the people, for they are blessed. And Balaam rose up in the morning and said unto the princes of Balak, Get ye into your own land, for the Lord refuses to give me leave to go with you. And the princes of Moab rose up, and they went unto Balak, and said, Balaam refuses to come with us. And Balak set yet again princes more and more honorable than they. And they came to Balaam and said unto him, Thus saith Balak the son of Zippor, Let nothing, I pray thee, hinder thee from coming unto me. For I will promote thee unto very great honor, and I will do whatsoever thou sayest unto me. Come therefore, I pray thee, curse me this people. And Balaam answered and said unto the servants of Balak, this is a great phrase, if Balak would give me this house full of silver and gold, I cannot go beyond the word of the Lord my God to do less or more. How often are we too stubborn to hear the word no? I can't really give any illustration because my parents are here and Bob's gotten away with it too long, so I can't expound on those stories. I'm just kidding. It's great having a little brother who's also in the ministry that knows that killing me would be wrong. Here we have the stubbornness of the king, of Balak. Verse 7, when it mentions that they bring money, I don't think we can get too judgmental in that regard. And even as they come back with more, the actual aspect of trying to buy support is certainly not something that I think we can get too judgmental. Samuel received it in 1 Samuel 9. Elijah did as well in 2 Kings 8. And so it was certainly has been done before and was done by Samuel and Elijah. And they received by Samuel and Elijah. It certainly was just the way, hey, we know that you can do something. We would like to pay you to come do that. And so in the very reality of trying to pay this seer, this one who could curse and curse them, and one who could bless, and they'd actually be blessed, that was a normal routine in that day and age. Verse 8, when he says, Lodge here, and I will give you word tomorrow morning, and then we have the instructions, don't go with them. They're a blessed people, so don't go with them to curse them, because you won't. So verse 13, Balaam sends them packing. They report back to the king and say, he's not coming, he won't come. How does the king respond? I'll send more important people. And the word almost has the idea, and I'll send more with those more important people. In verse 15, Balak sent yet again princes more and more honorable than they. And look at verse 16, it says, Let nothing, I pray thee, hinder thee from coming unto me. What is the king saying indirectly to Balaam? Whatever it takes, I will pay. Whatever it takes, I will pay. How many of us would be true to our God, true to submitting our God, if someone says, hey, whatever it takes, I will pay, I will handle, I will take care of, if you will, whatever it might be. I can't imagine, especially as you read through the Fox's Book of Martyrs, as you hear what some of them faced. And literally as their whole families were brought out and tied to a post with wood underneath their feet. And it would say simply, all you have to do is reject your God and we will unloose you. But they had the boldness, they had the faith, they had the yieldness, submission to say, we can't. We will die before we do such things. And I like Balaam's response that, hey, it doesn't matter if he gave me all that he owns. That's not valid enough reason for me to go. I can't do less and I can't do more than our God says. Turning down a blank check is pretty difficult to do. Turning down a whatever you want, whatever keeps you back, whatever it is that you need to be able to go and do what we need you to do, we'll take care of. I perhaps have shared this illustration before, but I'm reminded of it again. There was a certain, my wife will remember this, a goldfish incident when I was a youth pastor. One of my responsibilities as assistant pastor was the youth of all ages. But for the teenagers, we would often have activities. We tried to have them probably every other week. We'd have an activity every other week. One activity a month was kind of smaller. Maybe it's meeting at the church, playing some indoor games, and having a devotional, eating pizza. And then one activity a month was much larger. We'd go somewhere. Money would have to get spent, that type of thing. Well, I played this. I came up with this game, and we had enough help in the church, and a lot of college students, even from Maranatha, that would come and help us. And so I came up with this point system, and I think we had like an hour and a half. We broke up in, I think it was 4 teams, maybe 5 or 6 teams, maybe a handful, 6, 7, 8 per team. And you had an hour and a half to accomplish some things on the list anywhere in town. And so we had an adult driver or a college student driver who was not only supposed to be the transportation, but also the let's not break any laws or let's not make an embarrassment of the church or our Lord in this process. But here's some things. For instance, I'll give you some ideas. There might be something like 2 points. If you can go to a store and buy something so that the receipt totals 42 cents. So then they've got to figure out, and it was hilarious how many times that they'd find something and the tax would come onto it and it'd be 1 cent over or 1 cent less. So they'd have to go find something else. And I don't know how many dollars that these teams spent trying to get 42 cents. I picked 42 cents because I thought surely even in the car, whatever car they're using, there's probably 50 cents in the seats even. This should be good, but hilarious. Some of them spent like $3, $4, $5 trying to get 42 cents. But anyway, you get 2 points if you can do that. 5 points perhaps if you can get a picture of your entire team in front of a fireplace. Our pastor, who lived right next door, had a fireplace, but we put all church property, including parsonages, off limits. Go find someone. So you're driving around town and you're looking for chimneys. Oh, they have a chimney. Knock on the door. We're playing this game with our church. Can we get a picture of our whole thing in front of your fireplace? Psst, door slams. No. But if you can accomplish that, we'll give you 5 points. 7 points if one of your team members is captured on camera shaking the hand of a police officer. Maybe 10 points if you get a picture of one of your team members in the back seat of a police car. It was just this kind of fun things that you have an hour and a half. We'll come back and see what team's got the most points. The top point that they had was if you went to Walmart and bought a goldfish and one of your team members swallowed it. And I had already talked to all the adults to warn them, I don't remember what it was. It was quite a bit more points than anything else. There's a high likelihood that your team is going to try to convince you to swallow a goldfish. I just need you to be aware of that ahead of time. Because, if I'm a teenager, it's the college students doing it. But I didn't leave it, when I gave it wasn't try to get your team leader. It was anybody can swallow a goldfish. It's this many points. But I warned the adults, it may be you. Well, we had one team that had a particular, I think he was maybe a sophomore. Went to Walmart, bought a goldfish. This is on camera. Swallowed the goldfish. We had a great time. They all came back, and the stories that were told of their events of that night were just hilarious. We had some pizza, and we awarded, I think, candy bars to the winning team and called it a night. I think that was like a Friday night. Sunday, I kid you not, the church service begins and a mother grabs me. I'm wearing a coat just like this. She grabs me by the sleeve of my coat and drags me into my own office. We need to talk. And I remember thinking, I need to be on the platform. The service is about to start, and the pastor expects me to be sitting right there to start the service off. We need to talk. How dare you make my son swallow a goldfish? I'm like, I didn't make your son do anything. Well, by putting that on the list, you should have known that he'd be swallowing a goldfish. I don't know if I'm going to have a stomach pumped. I don't know what kind of medical response he's going to. I don't know if he's going to live through this. And she was literally not happy, not pleased at all with it. And I remember thinking, I thought this was, what is it, the neighborhood Bible time? They're swallowing goldfish all the time. I had the idea from neighborhood Bible time, and then again, it's college students doing it, but they're swallowing goldfish if you have so many kids there. Swallowing a goldfish if one team gets so many points, and so I put that on. Let's say if someone swallows a goldfish. This lady was not happy at all. In fact, almost threatening to leave the church over her son swallowing a goldfish. You know what it's like to walk out of your office and sit on the platform and good morning, let's start with hymn number and stand up and sing. And I'm thinking to myself, I am going to lose my job today because of a goldfish. And I think it was a year before they allowed him to, I don't know if he ever was allowed to go on any more teen activities. I felt like the real heel of the church for quite some time with that family because her son, outside of my control, swallowed a goldfish. But it was on camera, so we had proof he did it. You know, the truth is, it's amazing what we will do for 10 points. It's amazing what we will do for a few bucks. It's amazing what we will do then when someone says, whatever it is that will keep you from doing that, let me fix that and do it. I will give you a raise if you will do this. I will give you a promotion if you will do this. I will accomplish this in your life, and I'll take care of this need if you will do this. And how often we forget what it means to submit, we forget what it means to yield, simply because of that blank check. But how often we are also the king that says, I haven't heard yet the words that I want to hear. So what else can I do on the other side of this coin? What else can I do to get what I want to get? Picking up in verse 19. Not only are we too stubborn to acknowledge the main character, not only are we too stubborn to hear no. I really thought I had changed that. I'm thinking the first point. The first point is going to change here when I hit the clicker. It should have been to be number 2. Too stubborn to be number 2. I knew I had changed that, but it was on the wrong screen. Too stubborn to be number 2 kind of means the same thing, to acknowledge the main character. Too stubborn to hear no, and too stubborn to see stop. The instance then, verse 19, now therefore I pray thee, tarry ye here this night, that I may know what the Lord will say unto me. Now God came unto Balaam at night, and said unto him, if the men come to call thee, rise up and go with them, but yet the word which I shall say unto you, thou shalt thou do. And Balaam rose up in the morning, and saddled his ass, and went with the princes of Moab. And God's anger was kindled because he went. The angel of the Lord. Now, most of the time when it says the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, most of the time that is a theophany. I believe that most of the time, if not all the times, that a theophany is actually a Christophany, because John mentions in chapter 1 that no one has seen God, but they've obviously seen the Son. So I don't know if that we have an instance of a theophany, in other words, an appearance, a physical form of God, God proper, God the Father. But most of the time when it mentions the angel of the Lord, it actually has to do with deity. And my interpretation is that this is a pre-incarnate Christ. God's anger was kindled, and the angel of the Lord stood in the way for an adversary against him. Now he was riding upon his ass, and his 2 servants were with him. And the ass saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand. And the ass turned aside into the way and went into the field. And Balaam smote the ass and turned it into the way. Here we have the angel of the Lord coming in a path. And it seems that on either side of the path is just field. Now, if you have an obstruction in a path, where do you go? You just go around the obstruction in a field. That's what the donkey's doing. He's just going around. Balaam's not pleased with the fact of this animal going out of the way, off the course, to seemingly go around, and so he beats him and brings him back to the path. Let me see, where did I leave off? Verse 24, the angel of the Lord stood in the path of the vineyards, a wall being on one side and a wall on that side. And when the ass saw the angel of the Lord, she thrust herself onto the wall and crushed Balaam's foot against the wall, and he smote her again. In other words, now we're not open fields on either side, but now there's a wall. This area that's all mountainous, and we've looked at pictures of that in the past. This is kind of a mountainous area, and so here's a pass that mountainside, kind of like driving in places in North Carolina. You have wall, and you're just going right on through. And here's the angel of the Lord with the sword, and it seems as though obviously this mule sees this angel of the Lord with the sword, and seems to get seemingly all the way against the side as if to go around. Still trying to get around, but obviously can't go into the field anymore. But in the process of getting as close to the wall as possible, obviously, Balaam's foot gets crushed against the wall. He's not pleased. He beats the poor animal again. This is not a message on don't beat your animal, but that's what is happening here. Verse 26, and the angel of the Lord went further and stood in a narrow place where was no way to turn either to the right hand or to the left. Notice how things are getting narrower. Have you ever lived that? Have you ever lived in that regard as our God is working in our lives? I'm going to give you open rein, but I'm going to stop you. I'm going to close that door. And what do we, the phrase goes, we look for the window. We find the vineyard to go around, and we do. So the Lord kind of brings us even closer. And now we have walls on either side, but we still try to sneak on by. Well, now we've reached the point where there's no stopping. There's no getting around this. It's either you go forward or you stop. And so when there was no way to turn either to the right hand or to the left, verse 27, and when the ass saw the angel of the Lord, she fell down under Balaam. Balaam's anger was kindled, and he smote the ass with a staff. And the Lord opened the mouth of the ass, and she said unto Balaam, What have I done unto thee that thou shouldst smite me these 3 times? I wish Moses included more narration here, because I would love to know, what did this man think when his animal was talking to him? I can't imagine if I went home and my dog spoke to me. I'd say, what? What? Was that too much pizza last night? Did I just hear you talk? We don't have any narration. I wish we had that. It wouldn't add anything. It would just be curiosity. But verse 29, Balaam seems to just talk right back. It doesn't seem to have any indication that this might have been abnormal. Balaam says unto the ass, Because thou hast mocked me, there was a sword in my hand, for now I would kill thee. This animal has just talked to you, and you're threatening it back that you want to kill it. And the ass said unto Balaam, Am not I thine ass upon which thou hast ridden ever since I was thine unto this day? Was I ever wont to do so unto thee? And he said, Nay. In other words, have I ever done something like this before? No. But on this one day, these 3 instances is enough that you are going to kill me. Verse 31, Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand, and he bowed down his head and fell flat on his face. The angel of the Lord said unto him, Wherefore thou hast smitten thine ass these 3 times? Behold, I went not out to withstand thee, because thy way is perverse unto me. And that's an important phrase there in verse 32, because the argument is questioned. Is that right? Can you question an argument? The argument is given, why was God's anger kindled when God said he could go? And some have debated, as we go back to those earlier verses, when God says, if they come unto you, and the very next verse mentions that Balaam gets up in the morning and he saddles his ass and he goes. And the question is, well, did they not ask again? Should they have asked again? Should he have waited until they pleaded? What was it that God said, thou can go if they come again and call for you? So he leaves and God gets angry. What happened there? Others debate that, well, because God said no in the first place, that the fact that he kept asking, maybe he shouldn't have asked again. Maybe the fact that they came back with more money was not a sufficient cause to go back to God and say, well, can you reconsider? There's a lot of debate on what made God angry. But I think there's some great importance there when it says, at the end of verse 32, because thy way is perverse before me. Literally, it has that idea of you are rushing headlong into this. However you want to interpret what happened, whether it was he got eager in the morning and went, or because he asked again when he should have known God already said no. Whatever you want to make as your interpretation is probably correct, as long as it includes these words. God was angry because he was rushing headlong into something he shouldn't have been doing. That is biblical. How he did that is greatly debated, but this was why God was angry, because he was rushing headlong into something that he never should have been in. What that means, I think is greatly debated. But I know that what that means is often lived down in our lives. Again, not raising our hands, but how many of us can say, I have never rushed headlong into something that I knew maybe this isn't what God has for me. But I really wanted it. I really thought I needed it. And so we rush headlong into it. Maybe it is God has already made it clear, but we've tried to barter back with God and said, but what about this? What about the financial repercussions now? Things have changed now. Can I ask again? Maybe it was God says, all right, you can go in within these parameters, but we've tweaked them just a little wider to make those parameters fit what we want. Whatever it is, we rush headlong, unfortunately, too many times. And unfortunately, too many times, we don't have a donkey underneath us that is able to see what we cannot see. I am amazed that it is this mule, a stubborn mule, that is able to see that which this man could not because of his own stubbornness. Too stubborn to see. Sometimes we refuse, if we can say it that way, we choose not to submit simply because we're too stubborn to see that God has already said no. I cannot believe that I'm referencing the Gaithers again, but let me go back to that song. Sometimes we literally get into verbal fights with the lighthouse. Sometimes we try to barter with our God and say, but God, did you know that this was at play here? Did you know that I will get promoted with all kinds of honor and respect if I do? Did you know that if I go, I will get this kind of... Do you know what could be done with this kind of financial gain? God, had you know that if I'm able to do this, that these things will be taken care of in my life? God, did you know? Well, even just that very statement is such an odd statement for us. But how many times, maybe we haven't said those exact words, but we've lived them. We just need to let God know that this is what's at stake here. Maybe because we don't believe he actually already knew that. Because we didn't understand that God was already aware of what was at stake here. Because we didn't understand that God was already at work in that what was at stake here. No, learning to submit means I can't be too stubborn to be not number 1, but number 2, or 5, or 10, or 15, or 37, whatever it is, but not the key. It's not about me. Too stubborn to hear no. I'm going to keep going until I hear what I want. And too stubborn to see the stop, to see the no. And again, I'm not trying to pick on songs and poems and terminology, but we become too stubborn that when God closes the door, we are doing nothing but looking for a window. When God says stop, we ought to stop. When God says go, we ought to go. When God says this is what I have for you, we ought to run for it. When God says this isn't what I have for you, it doesn't matter what the blank check says. We've got to be able to be submissive to our God and say, I'll follow you. It doesn't maybe make sense to me. And I can see on the bottom line on my little pros and cons list that this is going to be beneficial to me, but I will submit. I will yield myself. And I don't know that anybody, maybe Mary might have been here. I don't know that anybody else may have been here when Mr. Cole was here. Stood right there with this gigantic yield sign and talked to those kids about what it meant to yield to their God. But I wish I could duplicate what he said. It probably took me 45 minutes to come close to what he said in 5. But may we learn how to yield. Let's pray. Dear Lord, we thank you again for your goodness. We thank you for your word. We thank you that we have all that we need for our life and our godliness. We thank you that we live in a day and an age that there's nothing more. We don't have to wait for more understanding. We don't have to wait for another revelation from you. But I pray that as we now live in that day and age when we have the blessing of having your completed word, I pray that we be able to be submissive enough to simply obey it, to follow it, to live for you, to stop being stubborn, sometimes too thick-headed or hard-hearted, to follow after you in obedience, maybe sometimes too quick to justify because of the advantage that our lack of obedience will bring to us. I pray that you would remind us of a donkey, remind us of a king, remind us of a seer who couldn't see, remind us of a nation that brought great terror and fear to others simply because of the God that they served. And we thank you that you are still that same God today. And I pray that you'd help us to be able to learn how to trust you, to submit to you in that. In Jesus' name, amen.